Welcome to Bledsoe Said So, everybody. I just love saying that. I just love the inviting energy of that. It feels really nice to welcome people to the show. Before we get into today's topic, which is something that I've been meaning to do for years, and finally the night is upon us to do this, at least this night while we're recording as usual, I wanted to get a few things out of the way. So if you want to stay current with our events and with our public appearance schedules, check out our Instagram, Bledsoe Said So. If you want to know everything we got going on, which includes all of our links to the show, to our merchandise, to our Patreon, and every possible way that you could support the show if you love it, go to bledsoesaidso.com. We do also have our Patreon, which is Patreon/Bledsoe Said So, where we have a couple tiers there with different ways that you can not only support the show if you're so inclined, but you can be a part of the show. On the $5 tier, we have a wonderful Discord community full of, I think right now it's at 800 something people, and really good vibes. Just a bunch of like-minded people coming together to talk about really deep things, spiritual things, connect on experiences they've had, and a lot of people are just making friends and not feeling so lonely in the world, being able to talk about these kinds of things that most people don't want to listen to them talk about. And then on our $10 tier, in addition to all of the perks below it, you've probably noticed by now that you will get your name in the show credits. So if you want to literally be a part of the show, that's one way that you can support us on our Patreon. Bledsoe Said So. There was something else I wanted to mention. Retreat. I have a retreat coming up. I think by the time this comes out, it'll have just happened, right? So that's cool. No stress. Got my first Monroe Institute retreat out of the way. Don't panic, because I'm going to be doing a lot more of these, and I'm going to be doing them more regularly. And that is something that I'm very excited about, to where basically I'll be able to host my own Monroe Institute outreach programs with people. So I'm in the process of building a website for that. So if by the time you're listening to this episode, and at the current time I don't have the website, but if it is out by then, check my socials. If it's not out by then, it's still in progress, but I am building a website for that. And then the other thing is, one way that you can help us out is literally, I know I'm going to say it, like and subscribe, guys. Like and subscribe. If you subscribe to the show on YouTube, it helps us out. Following our socials, things like that, because we're trying to get the message out there into the world. So, help us out, people. And so enough of all that stuff. It's not bad. 3 minutes. Got all that stuff out of the way. Tonight is an important episode. This is something that was very intentional on my part over the last 4 years. I have very intentionally not told the story of my family, of what happened to us in the first place. I've talked about the story. I've talked about the impact of it and things that have happened after and before and even during. I have never sat down and conclusively actually told the events of the Cape Fear River. And that was actually intentional on my part, because I always knew in the back of my mind that we wouldn't come out the gate with that it would be understood that people that are finding our show are already aware of some elements of this. And I did not want to just make the show be about constantly talking about these events. I wanted to always, at a later time, tell the story to its completion. And Alex and I have been talking about things lately that we want to get into. Obviously, the show's been restructuring, and it just kind of hit me, I think it's finally time to do what I've always wanted to do, which was tell the story. Because my hope is that people out there hearing about us from the first time and then look this up and they're curious about what happened to us, or, what the story is. Obviously, A, they could read it from my father's book. B, they could hear either him or myself or my brother Chris Jr. or maybe even my sister talk about it on other people's programs out there in the wilderness of the internet that we don't have any control over their publishing or their platform or anything like that. Or now, from this point forward, they could hear it from me on a platform owned and operated by the Bledsoe family, which has never really been done. So, yeah, I just realized it's finally time to do this. And, you're probably thinking back now and going, yeah, actually, that I don't recall you ever telling this story. Yeah, because that was intentional. From the start, I didn't want to do that, knowing that I would do it at a later time when we've built more of a platform. So anyway, let me just get into it. Many of you have probably read the book. That's great. Many of you have probably heard this story many times. That's great. I still want to tell it. I still want to talk about what happened. And also, I think in some way it would be cathartic for me to, in some way, control the publishing of this on my own platform, right? That's named after and representing the Bledsoe family. Also, I think that there's probably, and I already said this, but there's probably a lot of new listeners that will visit us at different points in the future that maybe they've just saw a reference to us on some other show and they're curious and they want to hear it for the first time. Great. Hear it from me. Listen to it from me. So to get into the story, we need to go back a little bit before 2007. And we need to talk about what was going on around our family. So my father was a very successful businessman. And by the time I was born, we lived in a gated community where the millionaires lived, if I'm putting it bluntly, rich people. We were very successful. We had means, we had whatever we wanted. I was born into this life. I didn't know different. We were church-going people, good people, right? But we were different people. And we had it all, man. And we just had basically this empire where if you looked at all of the construction companies in the area, like the region, my father's business that he built was like top 3 next to some very big players, some very, very, very big money players. My dad made it very successful at a pretty young age. By the time I was born, he was only 31 or something, and I'm like 32 now. So put that in perspective. He was just a very successful guy, right? So anyway, moving on past that part. Up until I was 12, we had everything. We had a normal experience of being very wealthy, living in a pretty much $1 million house, with the big pool and all the toys and given to all the my dad would always give to the community. He would donate to the schools. He would help people in the military or law enforcement or kids that were poor. He would be buying them Christmases because he felt sorry for them because, maybe their parents worked for him and they couldn't afford Christmas for their families. He was just that kind of guy. You know what I mean? And he suddenly, around 2004 or 5, by the time I was like 10 years old, he got really sick. He already had Crohn's disease my whole life, but he got to the point to where he couldn't manage in his day-to-day life anymore because the stress from everything that was going on with his Crohn's disease flaring up and his business basically running into trouble, especially post 9/11, the construction business started to plummet. And then, as we know, many years later, 2008, there was this massive collapse, right? You know what I'm talking about? So in 2008, there was a massive collapse. So the years leading up to that, his business was facing troubles. And paired with his Crohn's disease, which is a very serious inflammatory stomach condition, and the stress and anxiety that he was experiencing, he was having a lot of really bad Crohn's disease flare-ups. So he starts to see a doctor. And I'm going to skip over a lot of details here. This doctor was psychotic. And he gave my father a concoction of medications that were extremely toxic. They were lethal. They basically killed my father. And he was laying in the bed, just a fun fact, laying in the bed, floated out of his body, actually read the doctor's name tag. Or not the psychotic doctor, but like in the hospital when he was being resuscitated. He read the doctor's name tag. Later, when he was awake, he told my mom this person's name. And she was like, there's no way you would have known that. He was basically, dead on the hospital bed. So he's resuscitated from that, had his out-of-body experience, his near death or whatever. He's basically physically and mentally crippled for a year or two. Then by the time I'm 12, we went bankrupt and we lost everything. A lot of our stuff was basically like just repossessed and taken from us, and we had nothing. And we had to move across town to go live in a trailer. That luckily my dad had a little bit of cash left over from his years running the business, and we dumped it all into like building an addition on this trailer because me and my 3 siblings needed, space to live. So when I was 12, every weekend after school, we spent it building onto this trailer, which was a nightmare. And then the second half of that year, we settle into this trailer, and we're literally in poverty on the other side of town, out in the country, completely removed from our previous life, lost all of our friends and all the little kids we knew. And it was just this this gut-wrenching event of literally losing everything and having to move out to the country and live in this added-on trailer, go to completely new schools. I mean, we were devastated. As the kids, we were completely devastated. I was in a severe state of clinical depression because of this. My point is, we hit rock bottom very quickly, right around the time this UFO stuff started. So from all these sequence of events, being pretty well-to-do, successful people, going to rock bottom and being completely broke and broken as a family, to where I remember at that year, my father's crying because he can't even afford Christmas. You know what I mean? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine as a kid being like, I want a Nintendo Wii, and your father starts weeping and he's like, I can't afford it. You know what I mean? Like, just the thought process involved there as a young kid. It's like, those are things you should never see. I remember having to dig in my grandma's drawer for pennies to have lunch at school. Well, and then, of course, we went and we got government assistance to where you can apply. If you are a certain level of poverty, they just give you free lunch. You don't even have to pay. So by the time I'm in high school, we didn't even have to pay. They're just like, hey, you get free lunch. You can have it. Just take it. Feed the kids. All of those programs of government assistance for the groceries, all that stuff. We had to do all that stuff because we had nothing after having everything. Right around when all that collapsed, and us children were devastated, but ultimately, obviously there for our parents and concern for them, and not really understanding the scope of everything that was happening. That's when the UFO started. So let's get into that. So my father was so mentally destitute from all of this trauma and heartache of falling into poverty and not being able to provide for his children. By the way, when the business was sold, basically he was on the verge of death in a hospital, and he was not able to navigate that. So my poor mom, she just had to, she sold it. And he had to deal with the consequence of that, just the way that all went down and everything, not being able to recover from that. So that was kind of tough for him to deal with. So just the consequence of everything, selling the business, losing everything. He's going fishing this night after finishing a small job. And he's very depressed. He's not himself. He's not enjoying it. Some time had passed between, hitting the rock bottom point to this point to where he got himself back up on his feet enough to start doing small jobs, like maybe remodeling a beach house or something like that, not building and selling 100 homes a year. He was doing small jobs with small crews at this point, right? 2007. And he had just finished a small job. So him and his 3 contractors and my brother, they were fishing on the Cape Fear River that night, and my dad he wasn't feeling it, man. He wasn't in the mood. He was, as he says, and I'm just going to leave it at this, my dad always says, I was thinking the worst thoughts. You know what I mean? So he walks off from the group. He's not really feeling it. He wants to be alone. He doesn't want to bother anybody. He doesn't want to bring the vibe down. So they were in this open clearing. He always says the word cul-de-sac, but this was not paved. This is literally forest. You drive out past the country. I mean, like we're talking like, 8-10 miles outside of Fayetteville, maybe even farther out in the country on the south side to where you hit the highway headed towards Wilmington, which is where you and I live, right? But geographically for the listeners. So we were way deep in the country past the south side of Fayetteville in this place called Gray's Creek, which is where I grew up, 12 on. And he's out in the country of the country. You know what I mean? Like acres of forest to where there was this field where it's just trailers on like probably 100 or so acres of just grass with a dirt road and just trailers. And then there's a highway that runs, through it. So he comes off the highway. They go through this huge grass field down the dirt road, and then it stops. And there's a gate, and there's this heavy, heavy forest. You drive through the forest, all on like mud. This is not paved. This is way out in the wilderness. There's no light. There's nothing out here, right? It's a naturally like formed. I mean, people like kind of shoveled it out and everything, but it's like a road of dirt and mud and leaves and pine straw that's wide enough for one single car to go either way. So going on this trail, you're going into the forest about a half mile. And then when you get to the end of this trail, there's this huge circular clearing on the bed of the Cape Fear River, and it's all just grass. It's wilderness. But there's a part where some trees were cut down where Dad always called it a cul-de-sac because it's like a circle in the middle of the forest that's cleared. That's maybe like 50 yards either way or something like that of this spot to where you could park your truck. You could walk down to the lake bed. People had people had a little tire swing on the tree and stuff like that. People have been fishing in here probably for hundreds of years, this little spot. So they're in this clearing deep in the forest. And so Dad leaves them at this clearing and he goes to walk back up that path that the car comes in to go into this forest, right? And at this point, it is January 8th, 2007. So what do we know about the timing of the sunset in North Carolina in January? It starts getting dark at about 5 o'clock, right? That's accurate? It's about 4:30. So the sun is beginning to set, but it's still light out. That's important for later. My dad starts to walk up this path. So it's about a half mile, right? So if you do the math, that's about a 15-minute walk at a normal pace, which is accurate. He's for the next 15 minutes or so, he's walking up this path, but he keeps stopping because he's hearing these weird noises in the bushes and in the trees. And it's like, at first he thought maybe it's a turkey, maybe it's a fox, like this rustling the bushes, rustling the leaves. And it made his hair stand up on his neck. And he would stop. And he was like, something's following me. He gets down on his hands and knees.
Did he describe, I might be making this up, didn't he talk about it stopped when he stopped?
Yes. So he's getting down on his hands and knees. He's looking under the bushes. Is it a turkey? Is it a raccoon? Is it a fox? What is it? And it as you said, it would stop when he stopped. And then he would get up and he would keep walking and he would keep hearing it. Maybe a little, stick snap, the leaves rustling. Something's following him. Something's tracking him. And it unnerved him. My father was like pretty much a professional hunter, professional fisherman. I mean, dude, like literally, we lived in the country. Think like people on their rocking chair. You know what I mean? Like that's how we grew up, man. And people out there were either hunters or fishers or both. Period. Especially in the Bledsoe family. Not just my father and my brothers, but my whole extended family. And then my mother's side too, the Dickens, all hunters and fishers. Dude, you've been to our property. It's just a bunch of taxidermied fish and deer heads. Like that's literally, and that's my mom's side. You should see my grandfather's house where my dad grew up. It's like that times 10 in just the living room. I mean, it's literally like it's all hunting and fishing.
And it's the culture there. I
Yes.
mean, it's a large part of the culture in North Carolina and the South of the United States, you know, because if you're poor, then you don't eat. If you can't catch it or kill it, you can't eat.
Yeah. And see, I always felt like an outcast in my family because even as a little boy, I hated fishing. I wanted to read books and play Pokemon on my Game Boy. You know what I mean? I never was that way. The last animal that I shot, I was 11 years old, and I was depressed for 3 days. I shot a bird, and I hated it, and I felt terrible. Nobody said, "What's wrong with you? Why'd you do that?" Nobody even knew. I just took out my .22, shot a bird, was miserable for 3 days. I was like, this isn't for me. I'm not killing animals ever again. But anyway, back to the story. So he's walking up the trail, and this thing is tracking him, whatever it is. He gets to the top of the trail after about that 15-minute walk. It's still light out, right? But so this trail, the one from that grass field out by the highway leading into this like cul-de-sac clearing inside the forest, that trail was at a slight decline to where at the bottom of it and at the top of it, there's a difference in elevation. It's not huge, but it's enough to where if you're driving up this trail, you can't see over it in your car or on foot until you're at the top of it. Then you can see the horizon and everything else. It's like walking up a hill, right? So my dad gets to the top of that hill where that gate was going into this path, and immediately he stops, and he's stunned because there's these two orange balls of fire in the horizon. These massive orange balls. They look like the setting sun. Both of them did. But the sun wasn't there. They were orbs. They were orbs of light, you know. And my dad is freaked out. He turns to run, but then he looks back one more time, and a third one shoots there. And next thing he remembers, he's back at the campfire. So he's like, you know, not necessarily clear on all the details. He's walking back to the campfire, and he's thinking, oh my God, I got to find Chris Jr. I got to tell him what I just saw. So I'm going to come back to this, but he ended up being missing at that point for 4 hours. And that's important for later. And if you want to hear more about that, go and listen to, I think it's, I'm not sure what it is. We just recently did a re-recording of it, of my dad's first regression, which covers the material of what happened during those missing 4 hours. But I'm going to talk about it too. So anyway, he gets back to the campfire, and he's like looking for Chris Jr. Where's Chris Jr.? Where's Chris Jr.? The other three guys, which were grown men, Junior was only 17, but the other three grown men are like, where the hell have you been? You've been gone for hours. We've been looking for you for hours. And Dad's like, there's no way. I've only been gone for like 20 minutes, 15, 30 minutes. And the truck was in a different spot. The fire was out. Everything was rearranged. Dad couldn't connect in his mind that he was gone for 4 hours. He couldn't see it. It took him a long time to accept that after seeing all of the details. What's the number?
184.
184. We talk about the regression material of Dad's missing 4 hours, right? So Dad at the time couldn't accept that he was just missing for 4 hours. He had a block in his memory, right? And he's just not processing what they're saying. So he's like, where's my son? I need to find my son. I need to tell him. And he starts walking to the woods. They're like, he was over there last time we saw him. He's been gone for hours too. Dad walks over to the woods, and I'm going to just basically say that Chris Jr. comes out of the woods at that moment, and they're both screaming at each other. Basically, I just saw UFOs, and Junior's like, I just saw aliens, and the three contractor guys are like, hey, at first they're thinking maybe it's a prank. They're like, this isn't funny. So shifting gears, in that 4 hours of time that Dad was missing, Chris Jr. was in the forest, and he was, for about 2 hours, he was face to face with these two 3 to 4 foot tall, translucent beings. And they were like cloaked, so they were sort of dark, but they cast a shadow on the ground, and they had these red eyes that, if you're watching the video, they would blink like shutters. They would blink one after the other. And they had a triangle on their chest, and they were translucent, so you could see through them, right? But he always said their color was like the glow of the pale moon. My dad and my brother would always say they glowed like the pale moon. At any given point in this 2-hour time, Junior would be staring at one in its eyes, making eye contact, and he couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He couldn't do anything. He was just stuck. And the other being would be walking around, picking up sticks, picking up bottle caps, looking at it. He's just kind of investigating, just looking around like a curious child almost, like, ooh, Mountain Dew bottle. He's just picking up things and looking at them. And one of them was staring at Chris Jr. in the eyes the whole time, and Junior couldn't do anything. By the time Dad comes back down and he's like, where's Chris Jr.? And he gets close to the woods where Junior was, and he starts yelling, Junior! The beings, whatever hold they had on Chris Jr., it broke, and they dove into these sticks, and they went invisible and disappeared. And Chris Jr. like snapped to, and he could move, and he turned to go run to Dad. But he always told me that he turned to look back, or he just, somehow or another, before Dad actually walked up to him, he saw one of the little pairs of red eyes was still looking at him from the bundles of sticks. Like they were still there. He could still see them. And he turned and he runs to Dad. And then he's like, I just saw these aliens, these monsters or whatever he said. And he's freaking out. He's hysterical. He's in a crisis mode. And Dad's like, I just saw these UFOs. And, these contractor guys are not thinking this is very funny. I mean, they're starting to really freak out. And they all start to argue. And there's like chaos settling in. And then one of them shouts, look. And they look up in the sky. And there were these 9 lights. They thought they were stars. They were just there, these white lights. And then they start scrambling around and doing all these weird patterns in the sky really rapidly. And one of them just shoots down to the other side of the Cape Fear River, just like shoots down, and it stops hovering over the water, like with the bank, where so if you think about the width of the Cape Fear River, it's maybe like 50 yards or something, right? At least this part in Fayetteville. It's actually bigger here in Wilmington, this specific part, but this part in Fayetteville, maybe it's like 50 yards. So on the other side of that, of the river, there's another bank over there and another set of forest. This light shoots down, it hovers over that, and then it goes into the forest, and they can see it glowing in the forest. And they're all like, let's get out of here. So they all get in the truck. They all came in Dad's truck. Later, the contractor guys, actually we found this out because they told the Discovery Channel when they came. You have to understand that in a night like this, with 5 different people having 5 different sets of eyeballs, seeing different angles, when you're like, you're freaking out and you don't know what's happening, there is no possible way that all the details can come out in that moment. But later in the investigation, when those guys were being pressed and investigated, multiple of them corroborated that when the truck was starting to pull out, they saw one of those short beings run on all 4s, jump and grab the bed of the truck, and then disappear and go invisible. My dad didn't see that. He was driving. He was getting out of there. The other guys, they saw it, and they told that. That's how we found out. We're like, whoa, we didn't know that. Dad didn't see that. You know what I mean? So it was just crazy what came out from this night as it went on. So back to the present, right? They're driving out of the forest down into that tight, like really narrow dirt and mud trail, up that incline to get back up to that gate to where they can get back to the highway and get the hell out of there and get everybody home. And by the time they get to that part where the gate is, which is like where Dad first saw the balls of fire, I did say that a third one shot up, right? I'm pretty sure I did, like when Dad first saw him. But when they got to that spot, Dad always said it was like Dukes of Hazzard. Like, you ever seen the Dukes of Hazzard when the car goes up and then it gets airtime when it's driving over these ramps and stuff? He drives a truck up that thing. He said they Dukes of Hazzard it, like literally tires off the ground, like getting out of there as fast as they could. And then he gets on the ground and he slams on his brakes because one of those big white balls of light, like the same one that shot down to the other side of the river, it was hovering over the path on the road, like ground level. This thing is like 40 foot long, dude. It's massive. Dad always described it as an egg shape or a teardrop shape or a football. Just something kind of ovular, and having these spikes of light coming off of it, and they spin around and they rotate these spikes of light. The Discovery Channel did a kind of crappy rendition of it, but this was back in 2008, and anyway, it was all based on how Dad described the shape of it, right? But they even on the Discovery Channel, they animated it kind of like a Tic Tac with these spikes of light off of it, because that's how Dad described it. That's how he drew it. This thing was sitting there hovering on the path in front of his truck, and they all just kind of froze, and they're like, what's it going to do? And it starts to lift and hover up over the truck. Dad said it was so close he could have hit it. That truck had a sunroof. He could have hit it with a slingshot out of his sunroof. It just hovered up over the truck, and it just went away. Before they hit the highway, there was a trailer nearby of somebody that they knew, and they saw that the cars were home and the lights were on. And I remember, I'm not going to say his name, but one of the contractor guys in particular, I used to, and the only reason I won't say his name is out of disrespect. If you want to know his name, it's on the Discovery Channel documentary. All three of those guys are on there. But one of these guys in particular was always really, really nice to me as a child. And I was the same age as basically two of his kids, and we were in school together. So we would, before this UFO event, I would kind of be around them quite a bit because, they worked with my dad. But anyway, I remember this one of those three contractors. I remember him telling me personally that night that before they hit the highway, they pulled over to that trailer and they looked inside. The door was open. And you know how you have like a front door and then you have like a storm door that's like the glass door that's really thin, and you can kind of keep the other door open and that one closed. Do you know what I mean? So the storm door was closed and the main door was open. And he said that the couple was sitting on their sofa staring at the TV, just like zombies, like not doing anything, not moving. And they're banging on the door. Hey, help us. Something's happening out here. They're banging on the door. And they said that this couple that they knew, they're yelling their names. This is a small community out in the country, right? He's banging on the door. Hey. They're just sitting there like this, like just staring at the TV. He said they were like in a trance or something. They were like hypnotized, like they weren't listening to me. So they kind of realized, they're not responsive. They went and they got in their truck, and then they'd start driving off, right? It's my dad's truck. He's driving. They get about a mile around the road. They're all fighting about who gets to see their wife and children one last time before the end of the world, because they're thinking it's an alien invasion. We live out near Fort Bragg, which was only 20 miles from this spot that they were at, which is like literally the biggest military base in the world. Home of Special Forces, Airborne, Special Ops, all this stuff. So they're, and there's an Air Force base attached too. So they're sitting here thinking, where are the fighter jets? Where are the Blackhawks? Where are the Apaches? Like what, it's going to be here any second, right? It's the end of the world. I want to go see my wife and kids one last time. They're all fighting, grown men. They're like hysteric. Like I want to go home first. So finally they settle on that, right? And they're driving around the corner and they get to the spot where my father's wife died in his arms in 1983. She had a car accident. It was a dead man's curve. Lots of people have died there. My dad and his wife got in a fight. They were in separate cars, right? They were at a hunting club. And they got in a fight. She sped off. Dad gets in the car to take after her. It's dark. It's out in the country. There's not like lights around and stuff. It's really dark out there. And he rounds this dead man's curve and he sees there's a flipped car in this person's yard, and Dad's not thinking it's his wife. He's thinking, oh no, someone's hurt. I got to help him. And the tires are still spinning. The headlights are beaming. This car's like upside down. And he goes and he stumbles on her body, and it was his wife. And she died in his arms. 21 years old. 1983. Very significant trauma in my father's life. All right. So back to the 2007 incident, they're leaving the Cape Fear River from where you drive in and everything. He gets a mile down the road and he stops. like no stop sign or anything. He just stops on the highway because a huge craft is hovering directly over the spot where she died in his arms in 1983. And immediately, Dad said for the first time in his life, it flooded into him. He had this feeling of like no more guilt, that she was okay, that it was he didn't have to be haunted by the burden of it's my fault. He had these sensations of like she's at peace, it's okay. For the first time since 1983, seeing that craft over where she died in his arms, right? So right then and also his attitude had shifted. I'm going to get more into that in a bit. He wasn't afraid like the other guys. He was at peace. That's why he stopped on the brakes. That's why he didn't, try to drive around the thing when it was blocking the path. He wanted to see it. He was looking at it. Like he wasn't afraid. He was at peace. And so they get everybody home. My dad and my brother get home. My grandmother on my mother's side, God bless her, she has been a widow since 1994. And she doesn't like to be alone in her home. It's just a thing. She doesn't like to be alone at night. So a lot of people in our family will take shifts and they'll stay with her. Oh, so-and-so's out of town for the week. Because my uncle lives with her still, right? So if he's out of town hunting or something like that, he's going on a fishing trip, somewhere to be. Sometimes it'll be like, well, I'll go stay with her. You know what I mean? And we would take shifts. We have a big family, and everyone like just loves their grandma and wants to, help her and be there for her. So that particular weekend, my mother, my other brother Jeremy, myself, and my sister, we were all at her house. We were all staying at her house this weekend. So my dad and my brother had our house alone. They get home that night to an empty house. They start locking all the doors, shutting all the windows. They're grabbing all the firearms, the rifles, the shotguns. And they're like posting up. And Dad's turning on the news. He's waiting to see it's the end of the world. Nothing. There's nothing on the news. Not talks of UFOs, not talks of, the Air Force mobilizing, nothing. And he always thought that was so crazy. Like, how is nobody talking about this? You know what I mean? And the dogs start barking. My next door neighbor was my father's parents, my grandma and my grandpa, the Bledsoes. When we lost everything, when we went bankrupt and had to move across town, we took this trailer from our cousin's house and moved it to my grandfather's yard. He lived on 6 acres out in the country. So we put our trailer on his yard and then spent every weekend after school for however many months. I don't remember. I was 12. But we added onto this trailer. So we were literally next door neighbors with my grandfather. We were on his land. So he had this massive hunting kennel that was like an L shape with like 15 to 20 hounds, and our whole family, the Bledsoes, all of our extended relatives, they would store their hunting hounds in my grandpa's kennel in the backyard. They were like the extended Bledsoe family's hunting hounds, right? So there was a lot of them. And later, 5 years later, this exact kennel would be where Dad first saw the lady. And we'll talk about that in the future. But anyway, so all those hounds are just row, 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 row. They're freaking out, dude. And you get to know hounds when especially you hear them all the time and they're in your yard and you're like kind of one with the way that they bark and they think. And this was a weird night because they were going berserk. So my dad's like, oh crap, someone's out there. Someone's gonna, break into the shed and steal something. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, you can tell. I mean, even if you have a dog at home, you can tell the difference in the way that they bark.
Yeah.
If there's real danger versus the mailman,
Imagine 20.
Right.
So my dad's thinking someone's out there robbing the shed. He's not thinking there's a glowing being. He's not thinking that. He's like, I got to go out there. And Junior's like, no, Dad, don't go out there. Don't go out there, please. And, Dad's like, I got to. That's, my dad's tools are over there in the shed or his boat or whatever it was at the time, And So Junior didn't want to be alone, so he goes with Dad. And our personal family, my dog, it was actually my dog. Her name was Rose. She was a Chesapeake Bay Retriever. You ever seen one of them? Imagine a lab, but like twice as big. Like not length and height, but just like bulky, like stocky. They're thick, muscular dogs. If Labrador Retrievers, their original like design of their breed, like what they do is, if you think about the instincts of a dog, they're water dogs, right? You shoot a duck, they jump in the water, they grab the duck, they bring it back. That's a Labrador Retriever. Chesapeake Bay Retriever were for bigger birds, like geese. They're big, strong, stocky dogs, dude. You could drop a cinder block at the bottom of a pond, and that Chesapeake could go down and get it and bring it back. Rose was a big girl. And anyway, so dad takes Rose and he takes Junior, and they're like, going to the backyard to investigate, see what's happening. So by the time they get around to the kennel in my grandfather's backyard, they go in. There's these woods in our backyards separating my yard at the time and my grandfather's yard. There was woods even in our yard. I lived basically on a property with forest. I would play in it all the time as a kid. And they start walking in these woods in our backyard. And Dad's like, I'm going to send Rose after it. Whatever is back there, I'm going to send Rose after it. You and I will run around the forest into our yard in the clearing, and we'll go left and we'll trap it. And Rose will lead out whoever's trying to break into our shed. She will lead him out to us. And Dad kind of like taps Rose, like, go get him. And she runs through the bushes, through the trees. He and Junior start running out of the forest into our backyard. And then Dad takes a left to run another 50 or so yards to the edge of our property. He looks back. Junior's running towards the house. Like he just was at his limit. He couldn't take it anymore. So Dad runs to the back of the property, and he goes back into the forest at the edge of the property. It's kind of like our property was like a U shape, but if you think of like the center of the U was still our property and it was all forest, right? But then make that like a really big U, 6 acres. So it was like our yard, my grandfather's yard, and then in between our backyards was this thick forest. So like they're at this part, he sends the dog through the forest, and then he's like running around to go back to this part of the forest. Something's in here in the forest. You see what I'm saying? So by the time Dad gets around to the other spot, he stops, and there's the same being that my brother saw in the Cape Fear River that night that was 3 to 4 foot tall with the red eyes, the triangle, translucent, glows like the pale moon. Dad stops and he says, "You got me. I surrender." And the being told him telepathically, didn't move his mouth, it just thought it into his mind. You don't understand. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to help you. And then my dad turns back and walks to the house because, well, let me just say, Rose comes through the forest. By the time she gets to that point, the being disappeared. It just went invisible. And then Rose was at him, and it was like, it was gone. He goes back to the house, right? He goes to look one more time. He doesn't talk about this much, but these are things I don't forget. He looks out the blinds one more time in the direction of my grandfather's yard. He opens the blinds, and there was a being that was 8 to 9 foot tall walking towards him, and he closed the blinds, and he's like, I've had enough. There was a being in the yard, walking towards his window. But this one was really tall, really, really kind of more scary looking. And then a night or two later, I want to say it was 2 nights later, there was another incident, and this closes out the initial 2007 chapter. And I wanted to talk about some important things surrounding that, right? But so I want to say it was 2 nights later, somewhere in that first week, 100% though. And Dad starts seeing a light in the backyard, like in the woods, this glowing light. And he's like, enough. I'm going to put an end to this so that my son isn't suffering. I don't want him being in fear of this anymore. So he grabs his rifle. He goes out the back door, and this time it's in the back of our property to the right. At our property line, there was this fence, and it was our neighbor's yard, and they had like goats and chickens, a little kind of farm backyard, and their yard wasn't that big. I mean, it was pretty big. It was a couple acres, but past their property line was a massive Christmas tree farm. Now it's all houses, unfortunately. It's all suburbs. But back then it was a Christmas tree farm. So right from our backyard, we could see the Christmas tree farm. So he's at the edge of our property. There's this glowing light somewhere in that Christmas tree farm. So he gets to the back of our property. He puts his rifle in the ground. He starts army crawling under these bushes, under these shrubs to go past our property line into this forest. He gets through it. He has his rifle in his hand. He gets up. He starts walking through this forest. And then he comes face to face with one of those glowing beings again. 3 to 4 foot tall, the glowing red eyes, triangle on his chest, same one. And Dad was like, he just dropped his rifle, and it was like beamed into him telepathically. That it just changed him immediately. It was this transference or a knowing of a different way of life, and it basically was that all life is sacred. And it was like they communicated to him instantaneously, telepathically, like, you know, not to harm living beings, to be compassionate for all life, to understand the suffering of others, and to not add to the suffering of others. And it just dramatically changed him. It radically changed his personality, like instantly. He stopped hunting. He never hunted again. He won't hurt bugs. There's snakes in our yard. He'll scoop them up. He'll put them in a bucket. He'll drive them a few miles away, and he'll drop them off. Like, he won't kill them. He won't kill anything after that moment. And that was the conclusion of the original 2007 thing, like the Cape Fear River event or whatever. But after that was really where the chaos began to settle in, because my poor father, having a truthful event, decides, I'm going to go tell everybody, thinking they'll believe him. No one did, except for his children. Everybody thought he was crazy. Everybody thought he had lost his mind. And remember, just a few years before, he was poisoned by a psychotic doctor who also, by the way, that psychotic doctor ended up dying on the same medications he prescribed my father. He was like psycho. My father was the 113th hospitalized patient from this doctor, and he actually ended up dying on the same medley he prescribed to my father. And in that time that my father was on those drugs, just years before from the doctor, it made him lose his mind. This was years before, right? So people in the family are already like, oh, he's lost his mind again. You know what I mean? He's crazy, because he starts saying, hey, I saw these glowing beings. I saw these lights. Well, they thought he was on drugs. They thought he was dealing with Satan. They thought he was crazy. They thought he was lying. They thought it was just a big hoax and that he's just making it up. They said everything. Everything except, wow, Chris, tell me more about it. Like, what happened? You know, I really believe you saw this. None of that. Not a shred of compassion. It was all just like, you're crazy. You know, lock him up, take his kids. That was the reaction. Social services were called. My father and my mother were constantly on the brink of their marriage collapsing because of this, because my mother would brutally silence any talk about this for years, like years and years. Still gets uncomfortable talking about it sometimes, but she's a lot better, and she's more or less a part of this now. And it's like, that was 18 years ago, right? And all is forgiven. But initially, she was very much like, this is evil, this is demonic. She was calling the preacher. The preacher came to my house and was like putting holy oil on my dad and was like trying to exorcise the devil out of him and pray Satan out of him. And, you know, my grandparents on both sides said they were liars, said they were crazy. All of our aunts and uncles, all of our cousins, everybody turned on my father. He was the laughingstock of the town. He was the crazy guy, the pariah. And for 10 months, this initial reaction from family and friends in our community was so brutal that my dad locked himself in a room. And actually, it was about 2 years that he was a recluse, and he really didn't come out of his room much. He wouldn't go next door to his own parents' house for Christmas parties. or birthday parties for years. And anyway, so, it all happened January 07. There was so much ridicule and fear and torture and social services coming and all these things that my dad was so like unsure of like how to proceed with this. Well, one night we were watching TV, my dad and I and a couple of my other siblings. It's hard to remember exactly who. I mean, I was only like 13, 14 at the time, but we were watching TV. And we became obsessed over that 10-month period with watching those UFO shows of the mid-2000s. They were UFO Files and UFO Hunters. You can look them up. Back in the day, they were constantly playing. History Channel, maybe Discovery Channel, I'm not sure. But there were these really cheesy like UFO, kind of like the what was that show with Taps? The Ghost, I think it was called Ghost something. I don't remember. But they had one like that, but it was UFOs, right? So we would watch them every night. We're thinking maybe there will be some information about what happened to us or something. And this one night in particular, on UFO Files, there was this thing on the bottom of the screen. You know how like if you're watching some reality show, there will be a little line pop at the bottom, and it'll be like, Johnny, 27 years old, dentist. You know what I mean? Like a little text blurb kind of thing. That popped up on this UFO show, and it said, if you have had a sighting reported at MUFON, www.mufon.com, Mutual UFO Network. So 10 months after his initial sighting, he finally reported it. Very quickly, MUFON was calling. They were actually calling us. And Dad didn't think anybody would call at all or that anyone would ever see it. He just wanted to get it off his chest and tell somebody who he honestly hoped no one would ever even see it. It was just something he saw on TV. He's like, my wife doesn't want to hear about it. I'm not allowed to talk about it in front of my kids. My parents think I'm crazy. No one's listening to me. I got to tell somebody. This thing on TV said go to MUFON.com. They listen to people that see UFOs, right? They'll listen, but also I don't even want them to see it. I just want to get it off my chest. That was his thinking. He reported it at MUFON.com. Boom, they're calling. We're going to mail you something. We want you to draw diagrams of what you drew or of what you saw and, write descriptions and type more details about your story kind of thing. And that very quickly snowballed with them being immediately interested in us to the very next year, June and July of 2008. They were on our property with the Discovery Channel filming a documentary. So think about that. October 2007, he goes to that website, MUFON.com, reports it. Boom. It's like 8 months later, there's a TV crew at our house. I'm 14. You know what I mean? And I'm in high school. And these people are coming. Oh, yeah, Hollywood's coming. Woo, this is cool, right? And the MUFON people basically told us, we're going to vindicate you to the world. You're going to be heroes. We're going to go and tell everybody the truth of what you experienced. And we're going to make sure that, you have support and that you're believed. And they promised my parents that they would give counseling to the children, that they would counsel us for the grief and the ridicule and the trauma of everything that we experienced. And they were just like, we're going to help you. We're on your side with this. And in their investigation, they found a lot of data. They knew for a fact that it was like they were like, it's a CE4 abduction case. We're like, what the hell does that mean? CE4, Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. You ever seen the movie CE3, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the Steven Spielberg movie? Dad's like, yeah, I love that movie. Okay, CE4, Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. CE3 means you see something in the sky. This was their terminology. It's all bullshit, right? But this is like wacko UFO shit. But they're like, CE3 encounter means you see something in the sky. CE4 means you've been abducted. You've had a face-to-face encounter with an alien. And we're like, whoa. That's how they were codifying it back in 2007, right? And basically they said they knew we were telling the truth 1,000%. They knew from the moment they got the report that it was true. Because I saw the photos, dude. I don't forget. You hear my brother in here last week recording with us saying Man, when you were a kid, you would read a book a day and you would never forget a word. Well, these dummies didn't think that Chris Bledsoe's kids were listening to everything and remembering all this and cataloging it, and then someday go and, tell it to the world and tell on them. They didn't know he had smart kids. But I saw the pictures. I saw them myself. They had eyewitness accounts from 1952 of these exact beings and craft over the White House. That was shown to me. I later found out this individual was in the CIA. I'll get more into that later in the next part to the Bledsoe family story. He was CIA. The other guy was in another intelligence agency that is very similar to the CIA. Not sure if I should say, but it's very similar. Let's just say, it rhymes. And it's some intelligence agency. And both of these guys were installed under the guise of MUFON, being this like civilian, private volunteer agency. Really, it was a CIA op to smear our family and make us look like liars and like we're crazy. And that was confirmed to me by the guy who actually runs the spy program for the CIA, and his name is Jim Simiban. He told me that to my face, that he felt very sorry because back when our story first broke, that this was a very highly classified subject and it was the way that it had to be handled. So some low-level spooks were sent to our family to, his words was to do a hack job on our family with the documentary and make us look like liars and look like crazy. So anyway, so back to the present, right? 2008. So it's June. These people are here. They're literally intelligence agency plants, which we didn't know that for many years. We just thought they were, these dorks from MUFON who are here to do an investigation. And then you had the Discovery Channel crew, and they were fine. They were just, oh, wow, Bob Wiseman, you made Deadliest Catch. That was the guy who was at our house doing the document. We were like wowed by that. My dad loved Deadliest Catch, and also a nice guy. He was a nice guy. I don't think he was complicit in some grand scheme. You know what I mean? I think he was making a show. He was just making a show, and it was, these MUFON guys that were doing the dirty work. Bob was a great guy. I have nothing bad to say. We were wow. And oh my God, you made Deadliest Catch. I love that show. Oh my God, you're making a show about us. We were so naive. We had no clue what they were doing. And they were making all these promises about, you're gonna be heroes, you're gonna be vindicated to the world. Meanwhile, they're showing us the radiation samples they're finding in our yard from where craft and interdimensional beings have materialized in our yard. We were telling them that we're seeing things there. The experience has never stopped after the original event in 2007. It only increased, right? My mom is seeing beings in the yard. My brother's seeing beings in the yard. I'm seeing beings in the yard, in the house even. We're all seeing them in the house, in the yard, all around. Orbs in the sky, craft coming down. We're seeing crazy stuff. It never stopped. Year over year it increased. And we're telling them these things. So they're going and they're like taking freaking Geiger counters. You know what those are, right? The little things that beep near atomic blast sites because of radiation from atom bombs. You know what I'm saying? Chernobyl. Radiation. They're finding radiation in our yard from interdimensional beings and craft. That never made it on TV. What a shame, right? They're finding radiation samples on the tree where the interdimensional being was standing. The tree was turning orange. It was mutating. It was dying because the being stood there and it irradiated the tree. They're showing us this. They're breaking it down. They're showing us the data. None of that made the TV. None of it. What made the TV was they faked a lie detector test to make us look like Dad was lying. And what they did was they brought in some guy from the FBI. I don't know the exact day because this was 2008, right? And I was a kid and memory's fuzzy, but let's just pretend it was a Friday. And the Discovery Channel and the MUFON crew, they're like, hey, Friday, we're going to, the show's going to begin. We're excited to come into town. We hadn't met all of these people in person yet. I'm talking day one, bro. Think about this. You're filming a documentary. They were at our house for at least a week. Okay? Day one, before even meeting all the Discovery people in person, they're like, We're going to be at your house at 9:30 in the morning, ready to shoot. Yay, we're all so excited. We spend days cleaning our house. Mom's like buying us new clothes. We look presentable to the Hollywood people. We're all kids. My sister's like 11. You know what I mean? And that time, whatever it was, 9 or 9:30, it comes the following morning. We're sitting around tapping our feet. We don't have smartphones. It's freaking 2008. We're poor. You know what I mean? We're waiting to hear from a call on the landline. Like, where are these people? Phone rings. Change of plans. We need you out at the hotel off of Highway 87. Can you be here in 30 minutes? And Dad's like, oh, okay. He has to drive, 20 minutes away to go to this hotel. There's someone outside with the crew. They grab Dad and they're like, come with me. They lead him through the lobby of the hotel into this conference room. And when Dad walks in the door, there's an FBI agent sitting there. He had a sling. He had like a messed up arm. He had a sling, this FBI guy, old dude. There's cameras in the room pointing at Dad. The studio lights, just like these, they're all pointed at Dad. And it's like, boom. No, nice to meet you. He gets to the hotel. They say, come with me. They walk him to the hotel and they sit him in this room with the FBI agent and they immediately begin filming, and it's a lie detector test. And they sit him there for 4 hours and they ask him 30 questions over and over and over and over for 4 hours. Dude, my dad was falling asleep. He was literally falling asleep. He was getting so anxious about this. After 4 hours, his heart did a little anxious flutter and they got a little inconclusive. He's inconclusive. And they went and they took that on TV and they said, actually, he was being untruthful. We have to conclude he was being untruthful. It's a wrap, guys. Sorry. We really wanted to believe this one. And that's how they did it. That's how they got the untruthful. And if you even watch it back, my dad smiles when he hears that. He's like, I don't care what that thing said. Like, I'm telling you the truth. He wasn't like, oh, got me, and, act weird. He was just humble about it. It's like, if you literally watch the Discovery Channel show from 2008, my dad says, I'm telling you, I know what I saw. Like, I don't care what that thing says. I know what I saw. He was humble. He was totally humble. He was being honest, and they were being deceitful. And it was really, really sadistic to do that to the family. A hit from the CIA to smear us and make us look crazy. Literally told to me by them. That's the craziest thing. How'd they get away with that? And then and tell me later, oh, I'm sorry we did that. Thanks, man. I got laughed at for school, or laughed at school because of that. And my whole family was ridiculed and tortured and humiliated. Anyway, I digress. Some other things came from that investigation, right? So I say all that to talk about the dirtiness of what they did, because that is a real part of our story. But there was some good that came from it too. And they really did find data. Sure, they didn't show it, but I saw it, right? And I never forgot it. I saw it with my own eyes. I saw the Geiger counter in the yard. Can I read the number? No. I remember a bunch of old nerds with polo shirts saying there's radiation in your grass where the craft landed. There's radiation in on the tree where the being stood. You know what I mean? The other thing is they brought in a very highly trained hypnotic regression therapist, a protege of John Mack, which, if you don't know John Mack, he's the most famous hypnotic regression person ever in the history of UFO subject. John Mack, he's an icon, right? There's like movies about his work. So this guy, Michael O'Connell, wonderful guy. He was an angel, actually. He was the very first person that I met in all of this that I loved and I admired and looked up to. And he died not too long after that. Otherwise, if he was alive today, I probably would have had him on the show. He would have been an amazing guest. He was a wonderful human being. He was very kind to his children. He was a Harvard psychologist who did hypnotic regression stuff, trained by John Mack, right? So it's because of this man that I got a psychology degree, meeting him and being fascinated by what he did and the hypnosis he put my father under, that I was like, wow, psychology is interesting. And I grew up and went to college and got a psychology degree, right? Because of him. Side note, a few months ago, I got a random itch to look him up on Facebook, and or rather, I became friends with somebody on Facebook. I don't exactly remember, but I just remember that I saw Michael O'Connell's profile on Facebook, and I saw a post from like over a decade ago where he made a reference to the Monroe Institute. He tagged somebody at the Monroe Institute. So as an adult, I was like, whoa, this is so many layers of, full circle here. He was somehow connected to them. I had no clue what the Monroe Institute was until 2015. I just wanted to make a side note there. But I'll tell you this, there's a reason I said that. Because when I was a 14-year-old kid and he was coming to our house, he became good friends with the family, and he came over a few times after the whole Discovery Channel thing and everything. They just outsourced him. You know what I mean? He wasn't like a part of them. Kind of like how the History Channel brought the brain science guy to read the data. This crew just grabbed Michael O'Connell. They're like, we want to do a regression. And Michael was a bubbly guy, right? So, dude, he would not only bend spoons, he would twist plastic forks. Think about that. He was an incredible guy. He would take plastic forks and he would just twist them up like spaghetti noodles. Just, he was a powerful individual. Anyway, enough about that, right? So he puts my dad under a hypnotic regression. What was that episode number from earlier? Do you remember?
184.
So 184.
184, something like that.
Okay. So if you go look at episode like 183 or 184, he'll confirm it in a second. The one I said at the beginning of the episode, that hypnotic regression material that you are hearing on that episode is the exact hypnotic regression that was performed by this man, Dr. Michael O'Connell. And that was profound because I don't think what any of them at this, the bad actors who got involved with their story, I don't think they anticipated that it would have such a profound impact on my father and my family.
184.
184. I need to write that down and remember that. But 184.
183 is the one with your dad, so that's good too.
Oh, great. 184. Episode 184 is Regression Part 1. That was the session with Michael O'Connell back in 2008. This is the session that they're referencing on the Discovery Channel documentary. They only show like 30 seconds of it, and it's the most crazy out of context part. Like they're letting their children out to play, and then it cuts to the MUFON people, and they're like making a face of, it's like it's all acted. It was an hour and a half session where my dad was under hypnosis. And obviously we were cutting out the parts where Michael is doing the suggestion. We're kind of like cutting out his parts because he didn't want any of that aired or televised. That was his one condition. Like, you cannot air me inducing him because it is very dangerous because it can hypnotize people at home. So they cut out all the parts of Michael, like actually, doing the hypnosis. And then the transcript that I received was just Dad's words. But part of the hypnosis was releasing the mental limitations on my father's mind so that he would remember everything from this point forward. So not only would he recall the missing 4 hours, but going forward, there would be no more block, and he would remember everything. Every experience he ever has for the rest of his life. And it has been true. It's been so. Most of his experiences now are in the conscious waking state. And they're not like, poof, he's gone for 4 hours. What happened? Dude, for that first year and a half, from January 07 to the summer of 08, when that crew came and did the Discovery Channel thing and they brought Michael O'Connell to do the regression, for a year and a half, my dad would have splitting migraines if he tried to think about the missing 4 hours. And he would have nightmares and he would scream in his sleep and he would have cold sweats. My mom would record him. Back then we had those, those hand cameras. She would record him be screaming in his sleep. I remember it. She would be like, come here, come here, come here. We would all walk in the room and he'd just be screaming about weird stuff. Nightmares. And remember, Dad couldn't process. He's like, I wasn't gone 4 hours. And you had my brother, Junior, the 3 contractors, plus the MUFON people that had been coming from, October of 2007 to the summer of 2008. All of these external people outside of my father being like, no, Chris, you were gone 4 hours. He's like, no, I wasn't. I can't be. It doesn't make sense. And they're like, you were missing. And then he would try to think about it. And sometimes he would just pass out. He would get such headaches he would pass out. There was a block on his mind. And then Dr. O'Connell released the block. And all of the experience of his missing 4 hours came to him. And all of his future experiences were in the waking state, in the conscious wake state. He has dreams too. He has visions too, things like that. But most of it's been, when he's having experiences, he's awake. He's lucid. He's remembering it. So, in that missing 4 hours, what happened? And I think this is a great place to kind of round out the original events. And then we'll come back and we'll do another part talking about what happened next. In the original night of January 8th, 2007, if you guys recall from earlier in the episode, Dad's alone. He's thinking the worst thoughts. He doesn't want to be around anybody and bring the vibe down, so he starts walking up that trail. He gets to the top, and then he sees those 2 balls of fire. He turns to run, right? And then he looks back, and there's a third one. Well, something I was saving to say until now, because we're actually talking about the context of this. In that moment, he was terrified. But in the moment that he returned to the campfire, he wasn't afraid anymore. He was at peace, and that's important. They took the fear away from him. So here's what fully happened. So he sees the 2 balls of fire up on the horizon. He turns to run. He looks back. He sees a third one, right? The third one, Dad knew in that moment it reacted to his thoughts and to where he was looking. He just immediately knew. He was like, it's reacting to me. It's conscious of me. It's aware of me. That third one came down, shoots to him. I don't remember if it floats slowly, if it just shoots. I'd have to ask him. But the third one is now from way out in the horizon, looking like a huge row of 3 setting suns. Now it's beside my father. And now it's white. In the distance, it was orange. When it's closer, it was white. Like the thing that shot on the other side of the Cape Fear River later that night. Like the thing that was blocking his truck when they were trying to leave. It's that color. It's teardrop shape, egg, football, whatever. And it has these spikes of rotating light going around it. It looks like living organic light. You could probably think it's like plasma or something. I think a lot of people are pretty onto that theory that maybe it's plasma. And maybe it is. I don't know. But it's this like organic looking light. And Dad even described at the tip of those tendrils, it was like full of these spiky light-based tendrils. He even described that, I'm like, Dad, describe it to me. What does it look like? At the tip of the tendrils, they were like hexagonal shape. There was like geometry to this thing. And he reached out and touched it. And next thing he knew, he was in a dark room, surrounded by stars. He's on like a chair or a table or something. And there's a light on him and the rest of the room is dark. And the number doesn't necessarily matter. I can't remember if it's 3. I can't remember if it's 4. This is my father who experienced this, not me, right? But it's like 3 or 4 beings. And they're the 8 to 9 foot tall ones that, if you recall, on that original night, my dad looks out the blinds one more time, and there's an 8 to 9 foot tall being walking towards him, and he's like, nope, and he slams the blinds. It's those guys. They're really tall. My dad is freaking out. He's sobbing. Where's my son? Please, I need to see my son. I need to see my son. And they're like calming him down. They don't move their mouth when they speak. It's telepathic. They look kind of like these massive, somewhat alien beings, but they had a glow. They glowed. Like their color, it wasn't necessarily pale, like the pale moon, like the little guys, but it had a bluish hue. Dad always, when we were children, I'd be like, what, like a shark? He's like, kind of like a shark, like a bluish gray, but they glowed, if you think of like that color. They had these big, massive eyes, but they were kind of human-like, and these big heads and these tiny slit mouths, and they didn't move when they speak. It was all telepathic. They're really skinny, 8 or 9 feet tall, like massive giants. And they're surrounding my father, and they're telepathically tell him, your son is safe. We're watching over him. It's okay. We're not going to hurt you. We're going to show you some things. He's surrounded by the stars. And they basically tell him that they are the guardians and that they serve creation and that they tend to life on Earth like a terrarium, that it's an enclosed system and they keep the dark forces at bay. but that they tend to our evolution, that they monitor our species so that we grow accordingly, that we don't mutate out of control or destroy ourselves. They keep us from destroying ourselves. They protect us, not only from evil forces, but from ourselves even. That they created us. That's what they told him. That they created us. And they said that the powers of the world, they showed him like the government or the military, that there's just some power structure of the world that communicated to my dad that they are afraid of us and they don't like us. But they're powerless. They can't do anything. And they showed Dad, it's like think of like a vision of missiles being shot out to them in space, right? And they just disable it and they tumble away. And kind of humorously, they're like they're powerless, like they're terrified of us, but they're nothing. If that sounds crazy, I seem to recall 2 or 3 weeks ago, Congress just put up a video of a missile being shot in an orb. Just saying. And they said a lot of things that's covered on that episode 184. They showed Dad some like strange looking beings, like little, he always described it like a dog mixed with a duck, with like duck feet and a duck bill. They were just like creating these little life forms, and they were like, we create life. We tend to it like a garden in the service of creation. And they had triangles on their chest too. And they indicated that it meant creation. The triangle was creation. They didn't say, I am an angel of the Lord. They didn't say that. They said, we're the guardians. They intentionally used different terminology, but they kind of, Dad always felt after that experience that they were angels, that it was angelic, that it's what they were telling him, the guardians of creation, right? That they serve creation. They told him that they chose his parents even, and they pulled his soul from a faraway place, and they chose his parents to basically be like the portal of his birth, to be born into this world, to tell his story of his experience with them and bring knowledge of them to the world, basically. That like, essentially, we've carefully designed your life so that you would play a part in helping us get this out there to people. They showed him the pyramids. They just zoomed him right over the pyramids. They let him fly this vessel. Just think wherever you want to go. He thinks and he's there. Flew it with his thoughts. There was a little control panel and everything. You just touch it and he thinks, and he goes wherever he wants to go. He's going around the stars. And, they showed him a lot of things, but I think the most important thing that always stood out to me as a child when he was telling me, and at the time he never knew what it was, they showed him a very massive golden light, like enormous. He had no clue if it's the sun, if it's an orb, who knows? I remember when I was a child, like 15, at the time, the rage was this whole Nibiru thing, Zachariah Sitchin. So as a young child, I was like, is it Nibiru? Because I had no context for this. Obviously, I know now that's all bullcrap. Zachariah Sitchin made all that up. But they told him about this massive golden light, this golden orb. And they said that it was returning to our world, that it's on the way to Earth. And that the powers of the world fear it, but it's on the way, it's approaching. That it is something significant for mankind. And, basically that they'd be helping him, that they'd be watching over him and protecting him. And they always had been. And his near-death experience when he was 10, he was shot. And when he was shot by that shotgun, immediately he was on a surfboard going into outer space out of his body. That's what he always, his whole life, even a 10-year-old child, the moment he was shot, he always has described his entire life, even when I was a child. What was it like being shot, Daddy? He was on a surfboard flying out into space. They indicated that was them, that they've always been protecting him from forces that want to kill him and silence him, and that they'll be watching over him and protecting him. They also showed him some of the dark forces and explained that they're like parasites that feast on people's minds, like demonic spirits, and they keep those forces at bay and they protect our world. But anyway, so that was the gist of kind of what happened in that missing 4 hours, right? And I think a lot of that will make more sense in the next part when we talk about the most important part of all of it, which is the lady, the being that he saw in 2012. That is, I think, the most important piece of the puzzle, not only of our story, but of the human story, of the universal story, the religious story, the historical story, everything. And I think that's a good place to end it. I don't really, that was the original event in 2007. So, any thoughts before we close out?
No, I'm good. Good job.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening. I know a lot of you already know this story. And, I know my brother told elements of it on the show at one point, but it was important to me to have an actual authentic telling of this on my own platform. And that was something that I had always intended to do when the time was right. And for whatever reason in my heart, I just felt like the time was right. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you've already heard it, great. You got to hear it again. Now you know more details if you missed out on XYZ. So, we're going to come back and we're going to do another part talking about not only the next 5 years, but also everything after that, and just kind of round out, what it all means and everything. So love you guys. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for supporting us on our mission to get this message out to the world. And ultimately, it's all about just trying to help people see the bigger picture. That, there are genuine forces unseen that are interacting with us from another place, another world, or another dimension. And it all leads back to God. So anyway, bye guys.